I'm joined by Anna Byrne, who is the founding partner of Eckert Byrne LLC. With over 25 years' experience, Anna's decision to establish Eckert Byrne stemmed from a desire to create estate plans that encompass more than just a transfer of tangible assets. Her life experience as a young widow revealed a need to pass on wisdom and values to those left behind. I want to ask you about that. So sorry for your loss there. She's committed more than a decade to creating a team that shares that vision. She's joining us today to discuss her new book, The Inheritor's Guide, which provides a detailed roadmap for managing estate, tax, and financial issues, including the loss of one's parents, and shows adult children how to become a steward of their parents' legacy. So, Anna, describe your background for those who haven't heard of you.
So I am a trust and estates attorney. I started off my career as a tax attorney. I worked for the Massachusetts Appeals Appellate Tax Court Division. I worked for the IRS. And then when I realized that government was not the place for me, I became a tax attorney in-house for a wealth management firm around the first .com boom. And I advised on all sorts of tax issues, filed hundreds and hundreds of tax returns for various entities, charitable entities. And I really cut my teeth on the compliance end of tax and the strategic planning that's necessary for very high net worth individuals. And then I turned my attention to being in-house counsel for startups. Did that for a couple of years, and then found my way back into the law, realizing that I wanted to marry my professional and my personal experiences by creating a law firm that's focused on estate planning, but in a more holistic way. Prior to starting the firm, I felt that everything was driven by tax, and that was really my background as well. But in my personal life, I suffered a devastating loss. And through that and through other experiences with clients, I learned that it's really important to have a plan that's not just about the taxes. It's about more. It's about creating a plan for your loved ones to be able to start over and move forward without you.
Yeah, that's tough to think about. Do you mind sharing more of your personal story? Like what happened?
Well, my personal story is actually in my first book called The Widow's Guide, which was published about 4 years ago. And my husband basically went to walk the dog in the morning and never came back. He was shot and killed by a hunter hunting on a Sunday on private property. And that was that. Wow. And I was 28 and he was 33. So, life is very unexpected, and so is death, right? One of the things that people always ask is, well, when is the right time to plan? And I like to say, well, you know what? I really ideally would love 2 months right before you know you're going to die. And then we're really going to have plenty of time to really hash out all the details, figure out everything, organize everything in a very neat way. But life is not like that. Most people don't know when their number is up. Look at COVID, right? I mean, COVID was happening kind of far away in China, and all of a sudden it was here. And look at how many thousands of people died very suddenly who would otherwise probably be alive. Look at Surfside Tower in the middle of the night. It just collapsed. Things happen every single day. So I think it's really important for people to just recognize that our lives are terminal. That's who we are. We as human beings are just terminal. And think about, what wishes you have for the people that you love that surround you to make their lives easier after you're gone.
I wish we had you on talking about the first book. So I do want to talk about this first book before we go to your new book, because I find people are not prepared for being a widow or widower, except my wife. Our first date, do you know where it was?
Where?
Princeton Cemetery.
Was it Halloween?
No. I knew this was the woman I wanted to marry from the first day I met her. And I wanted to prepare, I wanted our love to sort of be this eternally focused thing where I'd be preparing her for my demise and me for her ultimate demise. It sounds depressing, but it was really a beautiful love story. So we went to Jonathan Edwards' gravesite. I don't know if you know who Jonathan Edwards was. Yale has a whole school called the Jonathan Edwards School, and he was one of the first presidents of Princeton, and he always talked about his wife very fondly, and he wrote amazing scholar, basically one of the greatest American people know him for the sermon Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. You probably read in like middle school or ninth grade, but he was a botanist, studied spiders, studied all kinds of things, and was in a lot of ways a lot of the intellectual underpinnings of the Great Awakening and then the founding of this country. So remarkable man. And so I don't know what led me to have this kind of sense of our own finitude, but I feel that a lot of people don't want to talk about death. That's probably the number one reason people don't do this thing. In your widow's guide, which I have it right here, your legal and financial guide to surviving the first year, I find that a lot of spouses are so rocked by the event that they don't do the things financially that they need to do. And then you'll often hear this advice like, oh, give it time, like come back to everything in a year. And then all of these other financial things like have to be done. So what are your top 3 tips for somebody just undergoing a loss and they don't know what to do with their money or whatever?
Well, buy my book. And I laugh when I say that, but I do mean it because I feel like there have been so many people who I've given more books than I probably sold. And I really believe that the book is a way to kind of help navigate this experience. And in my years of in my years of professional experience and in my personal experience, there is a pattern to kind of this experience, right? The first year is really the worst. It's very cutting and very painful and very dark because grief surfaces in so many small and significant ways that it is debilitating for many people, for many women. And then kind of there's this second year where you're kind of picking up the pieces and starting to kind of breathe again a little bit. You're still not fine. And the third year is kind of redefining who you are as a person that's single. And in this first year, what's really, as you mentioned, Josh, the desire is just to hide under a bed and cry and, just not move forward. But you have to move forward because there are significant decisions that need to be made and things need to be understood, especially if you were not the financial person in the family. And I think that, the first thing is just to understand that, even the smallest step is a step forward, right? And so I always talk to widows and I say, look, this is a journey. This is going to be a process that's going to take a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And what we need to do is break this down into the smallest possible steps and recruit other people that can help you get through these steps and tee things up so that you're making decisions kind of one piece at a time so that you're not overwhelmed by making these magnificent decisions kind of all at once. And so I would say baby steps, right? Even if it means like one day, like all you do for the first month is you just gather the paper, the mail that comes in, right? Or that kind of thing. And then maybe month 2 is you start opening it up and you start kind of contacting people. So just making things into bite-sized pieces so that you can move forward. And in my first book, I actually, in each step, it's kind of broken down into chronological steps in terms of when things really need to happen from a legal and tax perspective. I have journal pages, and those journal pages are really critical because most women who are experiencing this trauma feel like they are stuck, like their feet are completely cemented in cement, that they are not moving forward, but in fact, they are moving forward. And the journal pages are really important because you can look back and say, oh my gosh, I actually have done stuff. Like you just write down, what you've done, or look at the task lists that are also in the back of the book that you can see that you've made incredible progress. I think the second most important thing is to,
we'll hold that as a cliffhanger. We'll talk about the second and third most important pieces of advice for a widow or widower in the Widow's Guide. And folks, if you've just underwent this loss, I'll buy a copy for you if you call us and plan your no obligation 45-minute strategy session with the Financial Quarterback team. Give us a call, 888-988-JOSH. Or you can go to EckertByrne.com and buy the book, or buy it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. The book is called A Widow's Guide, Your Legal and Financial Guide. Then we're going to get into Anna's next book, but I really, I wish I had your book, A Widow's Guide, when I started, because it's funny. Everything you're saying like resonates. Like I've been doing this for many years, and it took me years to figure out, like, okay, what do you do with this person? There's a psychological component. There's the baby steps. There's some people who handle things differently. And then there are certain deadlines looming that you got to do. And the normal advice of, you just wait till, give it a year. You may not have a year for certain documents to be filed. Or you may be so under grief that, like, because you haven't delegated certain tasks, that then you wake up like 2 years later and you realize, you didn't make the IRA a spousal IRA, so you have 5 years to spend it, and all these other weird rules that people don't understand when they have a loss. So folks, give us a call, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. Wow, this is a great find. A Widow's Guide, Your Legal and Financial Guide to Surviving the First Year. 888-988-JOSH for the free review. Or you can go to Amazon and buy the book by Anna Byrne, Byrne. When we return, we'll reveal Anna's second and third tips if you're undergoing a loss. And I'll talk about some of my experiences as well. When we return, this is Josh Jalinski, the Financial Quarterback. Don't touch that dial. And we're back. This is Josh Jalinski, the Financial Quarterback, coming to you live. You can check out our YouTube, search for Josh Jalinski YouTube or the Financial Quarterback YouTube. Check us out on podcast, wherever podcasts can be found, Apple Podcasts. We have a new The Financial Quarterback Inside the Huddle on Spotify and the iHeartRadio app. And we're on WOR live every Saturday and Sunday. And if you have a chat, you can ask it in the YouTube chat box. So Anna, what are the second and third most important tips for young or old widows or widowers that you learned from your experience?
So I would say pulling all the pieces together is really an important next step. So it's kind of a combination of collecting data, right? Collecting the statements, collecting tax returns. It's finding all the papers. It's finding the will. It's finding the trust. It's finding life insurance policies. Finding out who your life insurance person is. It's finding out who your financial advisor is. It's finding out who your attorney is. It's like just pulling all the pieces together, just in terms of like finding the tangible stuff, whether it's email, whether it's statements that you found, getting the tax returns from your accountant, and just getting all of those pieces together, right? That seems like such an insignificant thing, but it's such an important thing, because what I find happens is people make decisions in a vacuum. Like they find this one thing and they're like, okay, now I need to make a decision about this. In this process of estate administration, you really have to understand the whole landscape before you could make a decision about any one thing. So pulling the pieces together and taking an inventory is a really important piece before you decide anything. It's a critical step that I sometimes find people in a rush to feel like they're moving forward. They start deciding all of these pieces, which may result in things that the outcomes that they didn't want or anticipate, because everything is tied together, whether it's a probate, whether it's a trust administration, whether it's updating tax basis information in accounts, or, deciding that they're going to get a life insurance payout versus perhaps doing a disclaimer for one reason or another. I don't want people making decisions before they have a sense of what the landscape looks like.
No, that's fantastic. So we're with Anna Byrne, author of A Widow's Guide, which is your legal and financial guide to surviving the first year. And we're going to reveal her next book. But man, this is just hits home, years of experience that I'm going to be giving your book away to all my, it's sad. It's a sad reality of this life that, and a reality of the job, that sometimes you're really there for people who need help, and having a book to give away is such a good idea. So people can just process. Some of it is just processing feelings or baby steps. And typically it's always now maybe it was different in your case because this is what you do for a living, but usually it's the least prepared spouse is the one that inherits the money. I don't know why that is, but from my sense, it's like they come to me and a widower comes to me and they're like just a wreck and they don't know where to start. And you're right, baby steps, great tip. Getting your POS, your pile of stuff, in order, that would be the best tip. I think that's the best tip if you're just starting out financial planning, if you're newly married, if you're going through transitions in life. Getting an inventory of, okay, you have this account here, this account here. It could be as simple. We use a modeling tool where you can see your whole financial life on one sheet of paper. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, but you should know kind of where things are. That's a great tip. And
yeah,
you're never really prepared for the loss, but if you have sort of an inventory of what you have, and we help people, we've had spouses who, there's one gentleman I came with, he was like 55 and he was obsessed with his death and preparing his wife for his demise. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. He ended up dying tragically, very young. I want to say like 56. I want to say like a couple years after I met him. And everything was prepared. We had put everything in a nice binder for his wife, and she did not know what was going on. But it was amazing because he documented everything, put it together. It was like almost he channeled his own energy, and she would see, oh yeah, that makes sense. And even though she sort of delegated the financial to him, she's doing quite well years after. And having him love her so much that he prepared was really, a beautiful act of love. And you see that occasionally, spouses who do a good job preparing, it is so much better on the spouse who remains. But
yeah, I mean, this is my big thing, Josh, that, estate planning is not about death. It is about love. It is absolutely about love. It's about love for your spouse, because you know what? That grief will be there. Are you going to allow that person to grieve? Are you going to allow your spouse to grieve? Or are you going to force them to figure out all the pieces and grieve while they're doing it? How are you going to get your kids ready for when you're gone? How are you going to avoid issues and, stress for them. Like, it's the ultimate gift of love. And this is what I've been passionate about since I started the firm, is that people need to get this death business out of their head, because it seems to be really affecting, like, it freaks people out. You know, it's really not a good message. Estate planning is really about love, about the love that you have for your family. It's about the love that you have for your spouse. It's about the love that you have for the things that for the people and the charities that you care about.
Yeah, for the people you love and the causes you love. And you could use my story, you know, my first date, we went to a cemetery. But I've always seen the link between preparing for death, not to be a depressing thing, but to be a liberating thing. Like, if you know you have these things put together, you can allow your spouse to grieve. And
oh, absolutely,
it's such
absolutely.
a powerful.
A week before my husband died, he loved Halloween, and we went on a cemetery walk, and it was a beautiful cemetery in the town of Hingham. And he said to me, "But this is how I want my funeral to be." And like, he explained in elaborate detail of what he wanted and what he wouldn't want. And then a week later, he was gone, and I was planning his funeral.
Wow. Yeah, I'm heartbroken.
And that was a gift
for you.
I mean, that was a gift.
Yeah. Yeah,
because I knew without a doubt what I needed to do.
How does our culture get away from death as something we don't want to think about, to death, thinking about your demise as an act of love? How do we, it's really culturally, like back in the day, right? Father knows best. What did he do for a living? Wasn't he like a life insurance salesman or something?
I don't know.
Somebody told me, I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody said, well, okay, back in the day, 50 years ago, the life insurance salesman was sort of like a respectable man in the community. Now life insurance is like, gross. I don't want to touch it. Although it's interesting, now there's a company called Lemonade that's sort of making life insurance hot again, selling life insurance on Instagram and stuff. But
yeah, I don't know. I don't think that, I think that life insurance absolutely has a place for especially young families, but all families where there's a need. Insurance is an excellent, excellent tool. I don't think that people should just, throw life insurance out the window. I think there's an absolute need for it. And I think it's just maybe education needs to be elevated, to kind of bring it up to a level from being kind of like the super salesy thing that people do. And maybe, scaring people about death is also an issue, I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking, even as I'm taking care of our 6 kids, we have 7 kids, and 6 I have to take care of because my other one's in the intensive care unit and he's recovering. Thank God.
Oh my
my
goodness.
wife is
I'm
with
so
him.
sorry.
And I'm basically watching 6 kids all day.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm really not equipped. My wife is equipped. I'm not equipped to take care of 6 kids alone. Thank God for my 2 older daughters who are 12 and 11. They help me a little bit, except they don't want to change little boys' diapers. So they'll be like, "Hey, Dad, the diaper." I'm like in between meetings. That's a nice thing about doing meetings from home. But I go, man, what would it cost me to replace my wife? For some reason, my mind went there. Like, I'm so glad I have life insurance on her because she's worth millions as a homemaker. Just in, like, we don't have a nanny. We don't have any of these things. But she does, like, everything. She's their teacher. She homeschools them. She cooks. She educates. She's a counselor. She's a psychologist. The families. She does like everything. Like, we really are nothing without her. So it's like, it's funny. Like, so but you don't think that. It's not ingrained. We do have to do a better job of preparing our loved ones for one's demise. So, first tip, baby steps. Second tip, get your stuff together, your pile of stuff, maybe in a nice binder. We could help you organize that. Third, what's your third tip for people before we go to the Inheritor's Guide?
You need a team. You need a team. You need a good attorney who's going to handle all the legal heavy lifting, and you're going to need an accountant who can do the tax returns, and you're going to need an advisor, a financial advisor, who's going to need to figure out how much money you have, how much you need to live, whether you have enough, what that's going to look like for you. Because I think one of the biggest issues that I see, regardless of how much money is left to the spouse, there's always a fear. There's a fear that there's not going to be enough. There's a fear that you're going to have to sell the house. There's all this fear. I mean, I've had women that I've worked with who've had, $20-30 million, and for some reason they feel like they're going to run out of money. So having someone really create a net worth statement and then a cash flow analysis for you, and someone to do the tax return and someone to deal with the legal stuff is really the critical step so that things get done in a timely way. So that's really the third step, is really build a team of people that are going to help you, and that will make things move forward and ultimately help you put this piece of your life behind you and start your year of, kind of feeling better, feeling stronger, and becoming now a new person because of this experience. Yeah,
and I would say also get that team before someone dies, because too many people, because I've had people on teams like you met with, and this is why your book's so great. You're dealing with grief for years, but that first year is so intense that you don't want to be interviewing financial people and grieving. You want to be interviewing them like with your spouse, even if your spouse does all the money management decisions, even if they're self-managing everything on their own, then you're probably a delegator. So your spouse may have not been, but maybe you are. So it's very crucial you get that team, I think, before someone passes. And I think there's no better time than now. So great tips, man. I'm going to get your book, A Widow's Guide by Anna Byrne, and then we're going to talk about the next book, which is The Inheritor's Guide. So if the first book was this good, I mean, I know we're talking about The Inheritor's Guide, but it's like, wow, I didn't even know your book existed. And
actually, a lot of advisors buy it for their clients.
Yeah.
And I have an advisor that I work with closely who's in the New York, New Jersey area, and I think he's my number one purchaser of the Widow's Guide.
Yeah.
He claims that I've landed him some pretty enormous clients because of my book.
Yeah, well, it just resonates. Everything you say is like what I experience, and it's such a difficult thing. So thank you for sharing your story, and I'm sorry for your loss. That's horrible. So give us a call, folks, 888-988-JOSH to get the Widow's Guide. And then next we're going to talk about Inheritors. Wait, what is the Inheritor's Guide, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
So A Widow's Guide and now the Inheritor's Guide. And if you call us at 888-988-JOSH, and you want the 45-minute no obligation review, we will buy a copy of Anna's book at no charge. 888-988-JOSH. We'll be back next talking about how do you impart and steward your legacy, not only the financial, the tangible, but also the intangible. When we return, this is Josh Jalinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. And we're back. This is Josh Jalinski, the financial quarterback. We're moving focuses talking about the Inheritor's Guide. So walk us through some of the steps you list in your book When one has lost a parent, this is also something like I lost two parents. Hopefully I won't, hopefully my wife lives till she's 100 and we die like on The Notebook together in the nursing home. But I just lost my parent. Well, not just, it was 3 years ago. It feels like yesterday. Both my parents died within like 7-8 months of each other. It was very heartbreaking. Walk us through some of the steps you list in your book when one loses a parent. What's the first thing we should do in regards to estate planning when a parent passes?
So, the book is really about estate administration, but I think it's important that adult children read this book before their parents die so that they have a sense of the kind of planning that they might want to encourage their parents to do, because once your parent dies, it's too late to do any planning, really. There's some kind of tax strategic work that we can do and navigate, but it's very difficult. So this book was really born out of my experience in the last couple of years working with families, partly as a fiduciary, in helping them navigate through this, complex journey that, really awaits most children, right? Their parents will eventually die. And what I saw was really interesting in that, it's a different experience of grief, right? Than what we were just talking about when you lose your spouse. It's your soulmate, it's your partner who you're with all the time. So it's a very different form of grief. And the loss of a parent is different, but it's still a profound emotional experience. And I think one of the things that I noticed in working with families is that there are, kind of issues from the beginning if there isn't a plan in place put forth by your parents that was communicated by them about what their wishes were. And really the first step, and the book is really geared towards the person who's in charge, the person who's going to be the fiduciary, whether it's the executor, personal representative, or the trustee, to really help them understand what their responsibilities are, but also to inform and educate the other siblings, the ones that may not be in charge, about what is actually involved in the process so that they are educated and not wondering why things are taking so long, why they can't get a distribution, why they can't go to mom and dad's house and pick out the stuff that they know they want that mom and dad maybe told them, you can have the china, you can have like the piano. They don't understand why they have to wait. So really kind of the first step is to secure the stuff, right? Like if you're going to be the fiduciary, if you know that you're going to be the personal representative or the trustee, your job is to make sure that you control all of the assets, not just the financial accounts, not just the bank accounts, not just whatever life insurance, but the home. You don't want things walking out of the home. And it's always amazing to me that, stuff walks out the door, or people feel like, oh, mom and dad are gone, so now I can just go in because I have the key. So I would say, just from that dynamic, I would say, setting expectations among your siblings and among your family that really nothing is going to be distributed until there's an appointment of the person who's going to be the fiduciary responsible for the stuff. Because what happens is one person takes one thing that another person thought that they were entitled to, and all of a sudden you have a rift. And the rift may not even be around the stuff. It may be around the circumstances, kind of around mom or dad's last days. I was the child who was responsible for going to the nursing home or being at the home every day, and you were across the country having your life, doing the things, and like you walk in and you take the thing. So with a parent's loss, it's really, I think the biggest challenge is kind of keeping the peace and setting expectations early and frequently around what the timeline looks like, and also creating transparency, a little more transparency than is typical around what is actually happening, right? Like what is happening in the probate process? How long is this going to take? So much like the Widow's Guide, it's kind of a 9-step process of kind of managing the entire administration. But it's broken down a little bit differently just because of the nature of, dealing with the parent's home versus your spouse. So really, step 2 is the discovery, like I mentioned, around the Widow's Guide, is you may not know what your parents had. There may not be a comprehensive estate plan that, in my practice, we not only create the documents, but we create a schedule, a spreadsheet of all of the assets so that whoever is named knows exactly what they are looking for and knows what they have to manage and oversee. So really that discovery stage is really pulling all of the pieces together from all the sources, whether it's from a filing cabinet or the mail or, perhaps even email. And then kind of taking stock of what documents are there? Is there an actual estate plan? Is there a will? Is there a trust? I just had a client call me, mom died 103, no will, no estate plan at all. She inherited her late husband's estate 40 years before, and the estate was in excess of, I think, $20 million, and there was no will. So, you have to understand what documents your parent had or didn't have.
Wow.
And then understand the roadmap of what is going to be the process depending on what documents you have or don't have. Most people don't recognize that if you don't have a will, it's not whatever everybody wants. There are laws called the laws of intestacy that govern who becomes in charge of the estate and who gets to inherit from the estate.
Now, these are great tips. And folks, get your copy of the Inheritor's Guide from Anna's website. Is it annabyrne.com? What's your website where they can get the book? Or do you prefer
annabyrne.com.
What is it?
annabyrne.com.
annabyrne.com, BYRNE. Or call my office at 888-988-JOSH for the free 45-minute strategy session, and we'll give you a copy. When we return, we'll be back talking more about the emotional guide, legal, financial, and emotional guide to help your parents with their legacy. A lot of adult children don't know how to manage their parents' legacy. They feel overwhelmed. And I've heard some tell me it's a loss almost greater than losing a child or a spouse by some people. I've had a family member, they lost their child. When they lost their parent, it was like their whole legs were, their whole foundation, their parents were there when they lost their child. When their parents were gone, it was like losing the child over again. And it was like a double whammy because they were all alone. Their sense of...
Right. You're becoming an orphan, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
no,
no
that
matter
happened with me too. I mean, you're like, oh, you have all these kids. My wife and I, it was, well, I'll tell you my story later. After we return from the break, this is Josh Jalinski, the financial quarterback. Give us a call now during the break. Get the book, The Inheritor's Guide. Man, Anna, I'm so glad you're on the show. You're like a rare gem that we found. I don't know how we got you, but I'm very grateful to Cal for getting you. 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back with Anna Byrne talking about her new book, The Inheritor's Guide, a legal, financial, and emotional guide for adult children managing their parents' legacy. Talking about my story, not to be selfish over here, but it is my show, so I'll share some things about me. It was so painful losing my parents. I think we're just starting to recover now. And it was rough on everything. It was rough on, because my wife and I, we are sort of an old school couple. We've been together since we were, 21. And she was the only woman I ever loved. I was love at first sight. It was, It's amazing. But we went through the loss of, we went through stillbirth, went through loss of my nephew, went through, it was like all these like horrible things. And then all of a sudden my parents died, boom, boom, right in a row. And it was like, they helped us. We didn't even realize how much they helped us till we were gone. They were like almost co-parents. So to lose them was so, it was really one of the worst losses I could ever have experienced. And my parents were like amazing parents too. So talk to people about this. People have like, talked to somebody after my dad died and they go, oh, well, I don't have a father. So I don't really miss, or I had a lousy father. So you should be grateful for you have it. But I think in some ways, if you had a really good parent and you lose them, it's like, oh, they were like a support net for me for so many years that you don't really even know what hit you. And like, I don't know how many years, it's been 3 years now. I feel like we're just recovering, and I guess, that's part of the grief cycle. Cause I know that's the case, like you said, with spouses, but I feel like 3 years into it, we're now just can breathe. And, I wasn't really prepared for it. So I guess your book, and by the way, the moment my dad had a heart attack when I was 12, I always thought he was going to die early. He lived for 31 years after his heart attack. He died at 71. Thank God. But I'd always had like an impending moment that life was short. That's probably why I took my wife to a cemetery on our first date. But I always found that gift of my father's early heart attack, and he had all these problems like punctured lungs and was disabled for many years. It always helped me prepare for my clients better, myself, but I was never really prepared when they wouldn't be around anymore. Just the lack of their presence. They were the most selfless people on earth. Yeah. So I'm dying to, and then I've talked about this with other people. A lot of clients of ours are single and have no children, right? And then they lose their parents, and it's like losing a spouse. They're like, it's even worse than what I went through to some degree, because it's like, well, when mom dies, like I'm really alone. So it's all horrible stuff. But I'm so glad you wrote a guide for this. So what are some tips for people? Maybe their parent hasn't died yet, but they're sort of, showing signs of dementia or Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment. What do they do?
Yeah, I mean, that is so critical. So the book, actually, my sister-in-law is a doctor, and she's a psychiatrist who lost her mother 7 years ago.
Yeah, we all need a shrink here.
COVID.
But, yeah.
No, and so she actually, the reason I'm mentioning it is she contributed to the book. So at the end of each section,
Dr. Olga, right?
Perfectly. Exactly, Dr. Olga. She contributes a section after each step that outlines what you might be feeling and what you might be experiencing. And I added that intentionally because of what you talked about, Josh, is that people are really shocked about how they feel so lost and untethered after their parent dies. I think the finality of a death, especially, a parent who's always been there your entire life, it's just very hard to kind of regroup and to move forward, and then have to deal with siblings and stuff and money, and people get stuck, and they're surprised by how stuck they get, and they attach meaning to things that they shouldn't attach meaning to. And really, legacy, while many people define it as money, it's in many ways the memory, it's the values of what your parents gave you that you want to preserve. And so in my book, I try and help people navigate that actual journey of the financial piece, while also trying to, help them maintain relationships because that's what their parents would have wanted, right? They would not have wanted to leave a legacy of strife, of argument, of litigation as a result of their death, right? So legacy in terms of this whole experience is not just the shepherding of the assets from your parents to their beneficiaries, you and your siblings, but also to preserve kind of their memory and what they stood for, and to maintain that peace, to honor that legacy. So to answer your question, Josh, I think that, really sitting down with your parents and having a conversation around what their plan looks like, whether they have a plan, and what they have, and helping them organize it and understand what they have. People of this generation, right, who are in their 70s and 80s, are very kind of closed. They don't want to share. There's so much, news out there of how things are going to get stolen. I mean, there's a lot of kind of fear, and also there's a great deal of privacy that this older generation has. But having a conversation and giving them a book like this, I think will open their mind to, what not having a plan would look like. And seeing that and having a sense of what that looks like, I think would help steer them in the direction of creating a plan, and not just creating a plan. It's maybe articulating why they're naming one person and not another person, why they've decided to divide their assets in a particular way, why certain decisions are made, because that's like the number one thing that people ask me is like, well, why did they do this? How could they have done this? Why is it that they didn't factor this in or that in? Sometimes they did, and sometimes they decided that, it doesn't matter. We have 3 children. It's going to be equal, and it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters except that they are equal children. It doesn't matter that one person is a billionaire and another person is an artist and another person just could care less about money. They don't care about that. They have 3 children. They want to divide things. These are the kinds of questions that kids grapple with. And so having a conversation with your parents before it's too late, and by too late, I mean, don't wait till they're 101 or 103 or even 80 to, sit down with them and have this conversation. Well, people don't realize I can't work with someone who has diminished capacity. I'm not going to put my license on the line and have someone sue me because I create an estate plan for someone who I thought was perfectly fine, if it turns out that they were, maybe diagnosed already and having some form of early dementia, and that undermines their plan. Have this conversation with your parents while they're healthy, help educate them about, that your goal as children is to help preserve their legacy and the love and the family that they have created. And they need to create documents that align with those legacy values that they have.
Fantastic. So the Inheritor's Guide, get it, go to annabyrne.com or Google The Inheritor's Guide, a legal, financial, and emotional guide for adult children managing their parents' legacy. Or call us at 888-988-JOSH. That's 888-988-5674, 888-988-JOSH. And we'll give you the book when you schedule and keep your no-obligation second opinion on your money. Folks, give us a call now, 888-988-JOSH. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back. This is Josh Jalinski, the financial quarterback with Anna Byrne, attorney, talking about the Inheritor's Guide. So we talked a lot about the emotions. What about the tactical things? Like, what are some tips or tools around, like, you should do a trust, or you should do this, or, some of the, generally, actually, that's what I focus on a lot, the tactical side, but really was the mindset I thought was really helpful with this whole interview so far. What tools do you like? What don't you like? Things like that. Trusts, transferable and death stuff.
So Yeah. So, in my practice, so we're in Massachusetts. I think New Jersey is a little similar, probably more similar to Massachusetts than New York. But in Massachusetts, you can completely avoid probate. And you can avoid probate by creating a revocable trust. And that is the number one tool that we use. I really have to be convinced to draft a will these days. That's just a standalone will because it's a public process and it requires probate to get anything done. With COVID and just kind of the regular court delays, we're looking at probably 3 months before we get an appointment. So that means 3 months of not being able to touch a bank account, not being able to touch an investment account, not to get any information whatsoever until that appointment is in hand. So in my practice, we predominantly draft revocable trusts, and revocable trusts can completely avoid probate. But what most people don't realize is that just the trust alone doesn't avoid probate. And we have probably 85% of our clients show up in our office with a nice binder of documents that they had done 20 years ago. And they're saying, we have trusts, this is to avoid probate. And we ask them, well, what do your trusts own? And they look at us like a deer in headlights and they say, what do you mean? Our trusts, we don't know. We don't know what our trusts own.
They never funded them.
And so we explain that trusts can only avoid probate if the trust owns an account or a home or an asset. So what's very important in doing an estate plan is when you create a trust that you actually have to align and retitle your assets with that estate plan. So if you have a trust and if you have investment accounts, those investment accounts have to be retitled into the name of that trust. If you have a home and you have a state that doesn't tax you on transfer, then that property needs to be transferred into trust, and you can completely avoid the probate process.
Oh, fantastic.
So I don't know if that's how it works in New Jersey, but that's how it works in Massachusetts.
So you're a fan of revocable living trusts. What about any other techniques that our listeners should be aware of?
So one thing that we haven't really talked about is disability planning, and disability planning is really critical, and revocable trusts are very important because in my experience, powers of attorney are frequently not liked by financial institutions. I mean, we've had the major financial institutions throw out our powers of attorney and tell us that, we need our legal department to review the power of attorney before it's made effective.
Yeah, we work with Fidelity and some of the others when they're requiring their own powers of attorney documents now.
Exactly. So what revocable trusts do is they allow you to name a disability trustee, and once the account is titled in the name of the revocable trust, the disability provisions and the disability trustee that's named can take over without the need of a power of attorney. And it's actually better because the account is already in the name of the trust. It's really just a change of trustee. And then there's clear instructions as to how those assets need to be utilized during a period of disability. The payable on death and transfer on death designations are very helpful, but I find that they are used extremely flippantly by many people, and they can completely disrupt an estate plan. So why would you not just want a payable on death beneficiary designation on anything? Well, first of all, where's it going to go? If it's going to go to a beneficiary, how are the estate taxes going to get paid? How are the cost of administration going to get paid? Are you naming someone to be the personal representative and then not leaving any assets in the estate to oversee kind of the whole administration, whether it's filing tax returns or whatever needs to be done in order to effectively manage that estate? also, payable on death beneficiary designations don't account for, well, what happens when there's a disability? You're back to square one with using a power of attorney. And if you don't have a power of attorney for that particular financial institution, then you're looking at a conservatorship to be able to access that account and use that account for the benefit of the owner. So I think that I like very much the flexibility that payable on death and transfer on death designations offer, but they can create problems. And the Inheritor's Guide touches on a number of the issues associated with, naming a child as a signer on a bank account, naming a child as a co-owner of a bank account, or just adding a payable on death designation. And I think bank accounts seem to be the best place to use those payable on death designations, but that needs to be kind of looked at from a comprehensive perspective, kind of back to the landscape picture. Like, what are the assets? Why are we making a payable on death designation for this account? Why is it to this person and not that person? How are we going to treat this as the overall plan? In my practice, when we create this asset table, this asset spreadsheet, we actually provide funding recommendations for each and every account and every asset. And frequently we do make recommendations that payable on death beneficiaries are named on bank accounts and perhaps even other types of accounts. But those should not be used without really looking at the whole landscape to make sure that the estate plan is not running afoul. I just had a client whose husband, 2 months before he died, unbeknownst to her, added a payable on death beneficiary that removed 70% of what she was going to get from her estate. And she is gravely concerned that, she's not going to have enough.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Anna Byrne. What a great interview. Get the book, The Inheritor's Guide, a legal, financial, and emotional guide for adult children managing their parents' legacy. Thank you so much for a great interview. 2 great books we talked about. And folks, if you want the book, give us a call, 888-988-JOSH, 888-988-5674. And you can go to annabyrne.com, ANNABYRNE.com. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Josh Jalinski, the Financial Quarterback.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Thanks. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks, Anna. We're going to sign off.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Great guest. I would say she's going to be your most popular guest. I think you're going to get a lot of calls on her. Hold on one second. So, Noah?
Sir.